Hello, everybody. It's Dan King here, as always, from Fireside Strategic. Welcome to our videocast, Humanity Builds Better Businesses, where we celebrate leaders that do transformational work within organizations, helping their clients grow and lead teams with humanity. Today, I'm very happy to be chatting with Barbara Abadi, consultant and executive coach, and managing director of Real Teams Work. Barbara, welcome to the show, and we'd love to learn a little bit about your practice.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure. It was a pleasure meeting you. I have been in business in one way or another as an entrepreneur for 2 decades, and in finance for a decade before that. So I've had a long career, and at the end of my career was CFO of Abadi & Co., which was an international financial boutique. And then when the company was sold, I said, well, I don't want to stop working, so what's next? And I took a look back at all of the things that I really loved about working on a team. And then one of the people who worked with me suggested coaching. I'm like, whoever thought of that? And I never would have crossed my mind. So I did my research and I took some courses and started getting clients and never looked back. I've enjoyed it so much. Every experience with clients is different. I learn as much as they do in each situation, and I really try my best to customize whatever we do to their situation. Everyone is different. We're all human, and it depends on the people in the group. So it's always an interesting challenge.
Fantastic. So, given that every experience is different, this might be a tricky question, but I'm curious if you could describe some of the outcomes, for our audience of leaders who might consider working with you, some of the outcomes that through working with you, they might achieve.
Well, I always start working with the individual because everything trickles down from there. It's our energy and our emotions are contagious. So we would hope for those to be positive energy, positive emotions. So I always work with the individual first and try to understand their top 3 priorities and try to focus first on 3, because many of us, we're eager beavers and have 10. And it's not really very easy to do 10. So 3. And then we can cascade that down through the organization so that there are actually more things getting done, but they all funnel up to 3. And so that's step 1, to define the priorities. And then step 2 for me is always working with the leader to find out how they think and to help them find out how they think. And the framework that I use for that is positive intelligence, which is based around knowing your saboteurs, knowing how you get in your own way without realizing it. I will give an example based on myself. We all have them. I have a stickler that I grew up with, and I have always sort of loved it until I learned more about it. Because it does cross all of the T's and dot all of the I's, but drives everybody else crazy in the process. So it's just identifying those things where maybe it helped us get to where we are in our career, but it has sort of a ripple effect in the organization. So we try to see they're always, strengths that are overused. Our saboteurs are strengths that are overused. Like the fact that I'm very organized, for example.
Yeah.
When it's overused, that's a stickler. So just moving it back into the right place. It isn't that they're bad. It's just keeping them in their own lane, keeping in the right lane. And people tell me that it's very empowering to actually see how they think. And then with just a few habits that we try to build together, how much more calm they are in their day-to-day. And it isn't that it's like this like my whole life just changed because I worked with Barbara Abadi. They're small little victories that every day we catch ourselves in a moment and say, okay, what am I feeling? Is what I'm about to say the right thing to say? and just catching
Mm-hmm.
ourselves and then choosing. How do I want to come across? What's the impact I want to have with this person? How do I want them to feel after they
Yeah.
have a conversation with me? Another similar example is a controller, somebody who loves to control, who has a controlling nature. People stand around and wait to be told. And so there's so much talent that's just left on the table.
Yes. Yes.
So those are the things that
Yes.
I like to work with the leader first on those, because it doesn't take long and it really is a good foundation to where do we go from here? Because between the leader and the results they want, they've got people and processes. And processes are pretty easy. Like you can bring in outsiders to come in and fix that up. But people, you really got to put in the work. They're all different. So you got to figure out who's there, what makes them tick, and then how can we make them tick so they're happy ticking.
Yeah. But there's a lot of richness to unpack there. I think on one point that comes up for me is getting people clear on their priorities and how those saboteurs disrupt their ability to either focus or just execute on those priorities. And I think using mindful space, right, to help people. It's not your job to say, oh, this is your saboteur, but creating that mindful space so that as people go about their day to day, they can just watch, they can start to become that watcher. And it strikes me that I mean, it's sort of teaching people how to fish, right? It's like it's not your job to fix people per se, but when people are taught how to fish, in an ideal world, they're empowered as a leader to help themselves, and then that can trickle down to the rest of an organization.
Exactly. And they have to want to fish. Some people will say, yes, I see that. I like it. I think that's
Yeah.
good.
Every gift has a dark side, of course,
That's
right?
right.
But that's right. We need to want to change. We need to want to explore the gift and its dark side to
Right.
develop a more sort of sophisticated relationship to it. And that's pretty reflective work. It's not everyone's cup of tea.
But it can be done. Everyone can do it. It is not everyone's cup of tea, but it's possible.
Well, and yeah, I love the use of the word possible here because mindfulness is creating that space for possibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like within that silence, within that space, so much can happen.
Right. And creating the silence, taking the time to have silence. In this world, we're all doing more with less from home. There's not a lot of
Yes.
silence in most homes.
Yes. Yes. That urge, whether we're at home, we're leading an organization at work, that urge to get more done, right, is very powerful. But I kind of like the way that your three priorities can help people realize it's so easy if you watch yourself to see all of the hours you put in, but actually realize, these may not be moving the needle too much on the things you really care about. Of course, if you don't even know the things you care about, then they're probably not moving the needle much.
Right.
But there's a level of mindfulness there too.
And also, if you don't know how you're spending your time and how your team is spending time. That's another area that I love to work with people on, productive meetings. So many people that I've worked with have said, I have so many meetings, I don't have time to think. That's pretty scary. That's scary. Or I have so many meetings, I don't have time to get my work done. Which just means the ball keeps getting kicked forward and forward and forward, and months can go by and we're still looking at the same issues at the table. It's very interesting, even in our personal lives. If you to take a week and just write down each day, what did I do between 8 and 8:30? What did I do between 8:30 and 9? And it's very interesting. Personally, I always find that I scheduled more things than could possibly fit in my day. So that's a good thing to know for the next time, because that creates its own level of stress, right? So
Yes.
important to know that too.
There's something about, I think, those of us who are good at organizing will organize meetings very quickly. They'll sort of pop up on the calendar, they'll get locked in, and that's advantageous in some respects, right? Don't get me wrong, because it ensures People are going to do what they say they're going to do, but on the other hand, the calendar can fill up very quickly.
Very quickly. And without a person knowing it, now that people can access other people's calendars and just pop in.
The psychology of calendar links, I
Horrible.
think, is fascinating, right?
I don't like that.
I know, I hate those things. It's funny, our organization is still fairly small. We're growing quickly, but I'm still resisting the use of automatic calendar booking. And I'll use an assistant sometimes, but I'll insist that the assistant uses human sort of calendar booking or in an old school way for a few reasons. One, I think there's just something about how other people feel when they're told to book a meeting on a calendar link. It's sort of a pseudo authoritarian. There's something about it that rubs me the wrong way. What do you think?
Well, in some cases, I don't mind because I've already spoken to the person and they've said,
Right.
okay, sure, just hop on my calendar and we'll talk about that. Which I think is okay because in the moment when we're speaking, I know that they don't have a half an hour to speak about it. But I will say, for example, if I go on someone's calendar that I know and on their email signature, it says book time with me, and I know the person, so I go on to see when they're available. And then I have to fill out a questionnaire that says, what do you want to talk about? It's like, don't you trust me to like have a decent topic here? Or at least just say hello. Is that okay? So that I don't like.
Interesting.
I understand the point, trying to make sure that people are booking for a real purpose, but
sure.
Sometimes certain people should be allowed to say hi.
That might make for a more human working world.
Yeah.
I love that. Someone needs to do a study on the psychology of calendar links. I think there's a lot to unpack there. Um, there's a lot. They used to be not very common. Now they're extremely common, right? And
Everywhere.
there's such an expectation of use this, sort of fit into my world, right? And it's sort of a way to impose a set of expectations and norms, I guess, is one way to look at it.
Exactly.
Um, so that I'd love to hear more about your approach to meetings, though. So you love to help companies, develop a more productive approach to meetings and a more mindful approach to meetings. Could you, for our audience, because I know this is a super practical subject that definitely comes up in our work, be curious to learn a bit more about how you help companies with their meetings.
Sure. It seems like it's a very simple idea, and it is a simple idea, but it seems like it should be very simple to do. And it is in a way, but what's difficult about it is it really requires buy-in from the top. And if that buy-in's not there, it isn't going to work. And there is no reason to go to the second meeting about it because it will not work. So there needs to be buy-in at the top and at every single level beyond. So it has to be, people have to see an advantage to it. So, what I like to tell people is let's shoot for reducing your schedule by, for example, 2 hours of meetings a day. So the people who are in 8 to 5 meetings from 8 to 5 are like, yeah, that's cool. How do we do that? Up and down the chain. Yeah, I would love that. How do we do that? Okay, first of all, that saves 25% of your payroll spent on unproductive meetings, if you can do that. If it's an 8-hour day, and of course, many times it's a longer day and there are even more meetings in there, so it could be more. But we start by first having everyone up and down. Well, first, they have to understand and have conversations together as a group that we would like to, the leader saying, we would like to do this. Here's the benefit to you. You get more time in your day. And I don't think there's an employee out there who would say, oh, that's a bad idea. So you get more time in your day. And then we spend a couple of weeks. Each person keeps track of their time, which meetings they're in. And they also write different companies like to do it differently, but we can do it on a tech platform, or we can do it, by hand. We can do it any way they want. But whether they think they needed to be in those meetings or whether they just needed to know what happened in those meetings. So then they can do sort of a triage of their meetings after a couple of weeks of everybody going to meetings all day long without making any changes, just tracking, what are we doing with our time? That's an eye opener usually. What are we doing with our time? And then sort of say, okay, how do we want to spend our time? These people say they don't need to be, this person said, I don't need to be in that meeting. Well, let's get the other people in that meeting. Let's get their opinion about whether they think they need to be in the meeting. So there's a certain amount of time, like maybe 3 to 4 weeks even, to decide what is our goal here and who do we think needs to be in meetings and who do we think just needs to know what happened in the meeting and may want to comment on it. So then we'll need to have a system that they like, not that I give them one, something that they like, where they can make that happen. And so I do it in 2 90-day sprints. The first 90 days is really all about getting on track to set a schedule of how we would like to, which meetings are important and which meetings can we just scrap because they don't work. We don't need them. And also to have an agenda that works for people. The client builds the agenda, but and they build the rules, and I sort of help put the boundaries around there so people know, you've got to send it out a couple days in advance. You can't get it as you're walking in the door because people won't be prepared. And there are many different ways to sort of make sure that people participate. So they can discuss what they're willing to do about that and what people will feel comfortable with, because the idea is you want everybody to be happy with the process, that it's sort of mutually agreed upon. So the first 90 days is spent doing that and trying to cut out, say, 15 minutes every week or two, so that by the end of the first 90 days, hopefully we've reduced by 1 hour, which doesn't sound like much, but it takes quite a bit of time to figure out what's happening now and how we can make that better and be more productive. Like, what are our 3 priorities? Which of these meetings don't have anything to do with our 3 priorities? And if they don't have anything to do with our 3 priorities, should they exist, or should they be warehoused into a different group that works on innovation or something else? Or maybe they're just put on a shelf and on hold, like they're in line. They'll come around when we get these other things done. They're in line. So there's a waiting list. And then the second 90 days that we spend together is really more about building good working relationships in meetings, how to get people to trust one another, how to improve communications, and sort of work together to define the rules. I don't impose any rules. I mean, I'm sort of in this case, this is really coaching. This is not consulting. I'm not telling you what to do. This is coaching. I help you do the best you can do. And how to get people to speak up if there are people who don't speak up. What's a better way to do that? Like, maybe it's asking a question before the meeting so they have a chance to think about it, come up with their ideas, write them on paper, and then put all the papers in, an anonymous. If we're doing it on Zoom, you put it in an anonymous Zoom format or whatever. So that people can have a voice and be comfortable. And so, as I said, it seems like a very simple idea. Let's just whack off 2 hours of meetings and that will be great. But that takes real teamwork. This is a very teamwork project. But as I said, it starts at the top. And if it doesn't start at the top and stay at the top, it won't happen.
Oh, I love that. Really interesting. And I can see some of the threads that run through different facets of your work. I mean, it feels like intentionality and mindfulness are really important there. This becoming aware of our relationship to norms, right? Around meetings, calendar links. There's so much commonality between all of these themes. And meetings are got to be one of the things about which corporate norms are most entrenched.
Yeah.
And they're so impactful to, as you say, payroll, to time, to the things that a business really cares about. And yet they're like hidden beneath the surface. We're so unintentional and unmindful typically about meetings.
And many times put the meeting before the client. Like, this meeting is so important, we'll call the client later.
Yeah.
Gotta flip that one.
Yeah, right? Yeah. I'm curious, switching gears for a second. So I think one of the things that's interesting about what you bring to the table as a coach is that you have a background in finance, right? And I think a lot of coaches come from HR, they come from different fields. I think that that's sort of one interesting distinctive factor. Can you speak a little bit to how that plays into your work?
Well, I think it plays into my work, not so much that it was in finance, but because our name was on the door. So
Mm,
every chair and costs something. Every person sitting in it costs something. And
yeah.
since I was always working on the operations side, after having been on the sales side when I worked at big banks, but
Mm,
on the operations side, I thought about cost all day long. Like, what does every single thing we
yeah.
do cost? If we
Yeah.
are, let's say we have this plan that we're going to do something, and then 6 months into it hasn't happened. Okay, we wasted time talking about that. So we should have had another meeting at 3 months in or 2 months in and said, this
Yeah.
isn't getting off the ground. So, that costs money. People not knowing what the priorities are. I mean, that's the real cost of money. Like, and there are two very interesting studies on, and I have only a few blog posts because I'm not a big fan of writing. I should do more, but one of them is about, do your people know their top priorities? And there are two very interesting studies that that I read. I loved research, and one is by Donald Saul and a few other people. I love Donald Saul, and I can't remember everybody else's name, but he's at
Mm,
MIT, and John Cotter. And they found, after doing these big research projects of 150 companies, that only 29% of the people knew what the company's top three priorities are. Now, what's even more interesting is that those studies were held 10 years apart. So, what
whoa. Yeah.
happened there?
Whoa.
So,
Huh.
I think I have a very simple little framework that I work with leaders. It's called the Clear Leadership Dashboard. It's a one pager. You got your top three priorities, what you want to get done, who needs to
Mm,
do it, how we're going to make it happen, how we're going to measure success, and just stick to the real basics, because it can be, and this I learned the hard way too, as in an entrepreneurial environment. We would chase the next shiny penny. Like, there was like, oh, let's go do this. And having been in the emerging markets world where, every year it's a new thing because some other place blew up or something happened that no longer is interesting, or there was always
yeah.
a lot of change. But that, I think, led us to try too many projects often, which is true in investment banking. You do 20 possibilities and two materialize. So,
Yeah.
it's like getting a grip around how can we shorten that cycle to know sooner rather than later. So there's a dollar and cents on every single minute of the day at the office.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Especially when your name's on the door, or not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
names on the door, but you're the entrepreneur, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love doing these interviews to spread good insights to our audience, but I also love doing them because, man, I need this myself. A dashboard like that would be super, super helpful. And could I name what my three priorities are? Hmm. I could do better there. So I think that's a really, really helpful, beautifully simple framework. So really, really appreciate that. Very curious about, so given this background of having your name on the door, doing coaching, doing working on meetings, working on productivity and prioritization issues, it gives me a very good idea of the what and the how. I'm curious to learn a little bit more about the why, the sort of broader purpose. Do you have sort of a why or a larger, sort of guiding purpose that you feel is kind of a vision that really excites you?
Yes, I do. I think people can be a lot happier at work. I think that there's so much stress created. One, if you don't know what the priorities are and you're doing something and the boss comes along and says, "Why are you doing that?"
Yeah.
That is a huge, and I've been one of those people who said, "Why are you doing that?"
Yeah.
So I'm not perfect. I learned the hard way a lot of things and made many mistakes along the way. So I do think that clarity, like defining clarity and purpose and making sure, there's that famous getting the right people on the bus in the right seats. That's so true. If people aren't really happy in their roles, if they can't really relate to what the purpose of the company is, they're not going to be the most fulfilled people. And so, for example, I can say that I am truly fulfilled in what I do today. I'm touching people's lives, helping them get the results they want, getting happy, becoming happier, getting the results they want with less stress. That really lights me up. I think that's really fun. I don't regret anything in my life, but I wish I could live longer so that I could do this for 35 years.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Awesome purpose. Right there with you. Mine's similar. So as we come towards the end of our time together, love to end on kind of a lighter note. We've talked about some serious subjects around productivity and meetings and bringing happiness to the workplace. When you're not doing those things, what do you do for fun? Just good old simple fun.
Well, I'll start with what I love to do for fun, which is travel, which I can't really do in the
Yeah.
COVID world, but I love to travel. So what I do, and I love to read, and I'm in a book group, and all of my close friends love to read too. So I try to read about places I've never been. It's kind of living vicariously through a novel. So I love to do that. I live in New York City, so I love walking in Central Park with my friends. And it has been nice enough lately that we could do that. So that's great. And I love jigsaw puzzles, which sounds like sort of a boring thing to do, but it's very relaxing. And I like to paint, but I don't really have the space to paint the way I would like to paint.
What kind of paint? What kind of painting? Watercolors or?
No, I've used oils, I've used acrylics. I didn't really enjoy watercolor too much. I like to paint big things. And I like very simple. I like to take like a riff on some artist that I really like. Like Manolo Valdez is one of my favorite artists. I don't know if you've seen the Meninas I saw an art exhibit of his,
Okay,
I don't know, 20 years ago, and I just thought it was in France. I thought it was the most amazing thing. And, they're very simple. And I love that whole idea of, you've got just a few shapes, really. So I like to try doing that. And you can do that on a little piece of paper, or you could do it on a big, huge canvas. And if it didn't work out, you paint over it.
Amazing. That sounds like a lot of fun. Not a painter, but you've. I love the way that you describe how it's fun for you. Barbara, pleasure to have you. Learned a ton from this conversation. Very thoughtful, kind of mindful approach to how leaders can approach growing their organizations. That simple and yet so effective, and I think that's a wonderful combination because it just makes the ideas easier to implement in a very fast-moving, turbulent business world like the business world of the pandemic. So appreciate the conversation.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been my pleasure to be here.